that the experience that you had? It unfolded like that for you?
Yes, well, we actually our route to Portugal was a different one to most families. I had sold my business, which I owned at the time, which was a manufacturing plant. I had sold it, and my sister said to me, you know what, don't you want to come across? She was living in the Caribbean at the time, or she still does. She was in the Caribbean, and she said, you really got to come across to the Caribbean. I like the adventure, so we went across. Well, I initially went across, and then Beverly, my wife, joined me. Went across just to do a 1-month visit, which ended up being 8 months. So I went through I'd had an 8-month sabbatical. It wasn't planned, but it was a good time for me to separate myself from, because this is the problem that most families go through, especially when the responsibility is yours, you're making the call. Sometimes you need to separate yourself from your normal life because you are torn by those I think inherently you know you're making the right decision, but then there's the emotional side of it that you need to take into account. You're uprooting your family who are staying behind, do everything in their power to keep you there, especially grandmothers. They love their grandchildren, they don't want to see them go, and most certainly they don't want to see their family go. And that period in the Caribbean did give me an opportunity to kind of separate myself from South Africa and kind of make a clean break. I also got to learn how to sail boats, which I'd never done in my life, so that was also a good fun. We initially looked at the UK as being the place that we would naturally immigrate to, especially because of the language. It just seemed to make sense. When Beverly and I arrived in the UK, she looked up and no. She said, there is no ways I'm going to live in this environment. It was grey, and funny enough, it was summer, which should have been great weather. But funny enough, so she looked up and she said, no, I can't live in this country. So while we were there doing our research, we had also considered Canada as well at the same time, which my elder brother had already got quite far down the road in terms of going through that process. To be fair, I hadn't, the thought Canada had never been seriously on my thoughts, because I felt I leaned more towards a European lifestyle. But he had gone quite far down the road. He got his points. He had gone through the process of proving his skills set, etc., etc. He had done lots of visits to Canada, almost twice a year. He had gone across to Toronto. So yes, we were looking at Canada as alternatively a plan B. If we couldn't find something in Europe that we would like, we would probably have ended up in Canada. The other country that most South Africans will also like, or South Africans have a tendency to immigrate to, would be Australia, which for no specific reason never really interested me. I really felt that we wanted to be in the center somewhere, which was also our concern with Canada, for us to get home, or for our children who at the time were in South Africa to come and join us, or to visit simply. It would be quite a complicated thing. So we went across during our stay in the UK, I say to Beverly, I have Portuguese heritage. My father was born on the island of Madeira, and he went to South Africa at the age of 16. So my relationship with Portugal was at a distance, really. We spoke English at home. My father also spoke Afrikaans. He also spoke Zulu. So we spoke English. My mum was also South African born, so we spoke English at home. But I said to Beverly, well, now that we're in Europe, why don't we go to the island of Madeira so that you can meet my tribe? And we went across to Madeira, and we had organized, through my sister, we had organized some accommodation, and I got a telephone call, and it was a gentleman. His name was Alan, and he called me and he said, David, I'd like to meet you. And I said, oh, well, I can't be today because we had just flown in. And I said, would you mind meeting me tomorrow? And I went down to meet him. I obviously thought I was meeting somebody to thank them for having organized the accommodation. It turns out, to cut a long story short, they offered me a job in Madeira. And I had obviously, having come from the Caribbean, I was still in sailing mode. I wasn't really taking life that seriously, because our goal had been to essentially go, after having done effectively our research, to go back to South Africa and then seriously make that decision about moving. We still had our home. Our house was still furnished. Dylan, our son at the time, was living at home in the house. And he said to me, well, do you want to join us? How would you like to join us? And I said, I don't know. I've never worked for a boss, or I'm not an employee type. And they said, no, you work for yourself. The more you work, the harder you work, the more money you earn. And I said, but my wife. And they said, no, we'd like to meet your wife as well. And in this short conversation, we both got offered a position in Madeira. And they said to me, I said to them, but they said, when are you going back to South Africa? I said, well, the idea was to go back soon. And they said, no, well, why don't you stay, work with us, and if you don't like it, I mean, January, which was, this was August, September, in January you can go back and continue your life. And I looked at Beverly and I said, what do you think? And she was like, I like it, let's go for it. And that's what we did. We flew back to South Africa, packed up our things, came back to Madeira, to the island of Madeira, and started working. And our relationship with Portugal began then. It was easy for us. It almost sounds like this was a decision that was just made on the spur of the moment, but it wasn't. We were close to immigration already. That we had been through that 5-year, that long period where this discussion came up all the time. You know, when are we going? How are we going? Which is the best timing for us to go? The opportunity just arose in that short conversation. So we lived in Madeira for a couple of years, and then we moved to the mainland, to Lisbon.